July 2023, Mexican drug lord Michael Torres was dehumanized and murdered in prison as retaliation for the many lives he took on the outside. If that sounds intriguing, then brace yourselves as we delve into the harrowing stories of 10 cartel members and mafia bosses killed within the walls of a prison. Number 10. Elmer Pacho Araera. November 6, 1998. The great Elmer Pacho Araera was brutally shot in his prison facility by a drunk inmate. Back in the day, Elmer was the Colombian version of El Chapo. He was as ruthless as his Mexican counterpart when it came to trafficking drugs and eliminating his competitors. Born on August 24, 1951, Araera grew up in the Colombian town of Palmira in the Valle del Cauca department. While in high school, Araera studied technical maintenance, an experience that got him a job later in the U.S. However, while living in the United States, he saw a more profitable and booming trade: cocaine distribution in New York City. Now, in 1975 and 78, Elmer was arrested for the distribution of cocaine, leading to his deportation back to Colombia. However, this was a mere blessing because on getting back to his country, Elmer moved to Cali to negotiate supply and distribution rights with the Cali Cartel for New York City. Once he was granted this right, he opened up his own trafficking routes for the Cali Cartel through Mexico, with connections he had previously established, making him one of the first major key suppliers of cocaine in the United States. Araera also ran one of the most sophisticated and profitable money laundering operations in Colombia. This guy was raking in more money than 90% of the world would ever get to see in their lives. He was filthy rich, and with his wealth, he was promoted to be a Cali cartel kingpin and given control over more routes to supply his product. However, gaining more power meant gaining more enemies, and his major enemy back then was Pablo Escobar. Elmer managed to keep himself away from mainstream media until Escobar launched 2 assassination attacks to take his life. This put the spotlight on Elmer's operations and was partly a factor that contributed to his death. November 1991. The DEA launched Operation Kingpin, which targeted 2 of Herrera's distribution cells in New York City. Through a large-scale effort, the DEA utilized over 100 simultaneous, court-authorized wiretaps on cell phones, leading to the exposure of the Cali cartel structure. This made Elmer turn himself over to the Search Block, a unit of the Colombian police. For his cooperation, he was handed a 14-year sentence, which was quite lenient if you think about it. However, he never got back his freedom. On said day, an inmate named Rafael Angel Uribe Serna went to the football pitch where Elmer was playing football with other inmates. Upon seeing him, he rushed to hug him before bringing out a gun and fatally shooting him 7 times in the head. Elmer was taken to a hospital before he was pronounced dead. But unlike Elmer, who changed his lifestyle after entering prison, this next cartel member refused to do the same, and it ultimately led to his death. Number 9. Michael Torres. July 2023, a Mexican mafioso and cartel drug lord, Michael Torres, was stabbed to death in his prison cell by 2 inmates. The men who perpetrated the murder were 49-year-old Ray Martinez and 47-year-old Juan Angel Martinez. These men had no business with Torres. They weren't cartel sicarios and were in prison for murder and other crimes. So why exactly did they take the drop on Torres? Well, the answer revolves around one word: revenge. You see, back in the 90s, Torres joined the popular San Fernando Valley street gang named the Sanford Gang. He was quite young at this time and didn't get his hands too deep into the narcotics underworld. He robbed commuters, hijacked cars, and was a pickpocket for the most part, until he was sponsored to join the Mexican Mafia by one of its founders, Luis Sueto Buff Flores, in 1994. However, he would be arrested for manslaughter less than a year later, but this is where it gets interesting. In the early 2000s, Torres was released after serving 16 years for his crime. You might expect any normal person to move on from the world of crime and try for that normal life. Not Torres. In his case, he went deeper into the world of crime. mingling with cartel members to export their products across the borders and into the United States. However, on the flip side of this, there was a man known as Smokey, who was affiliated with the Mexican Mafia under the alias David Diablo Mendoza. Mr. Mendoza's role involved extracting protection fees from drug dealers and prostitutes within the region, which were rightfully owed to Torres and his associates. The situation prompted Torres to pursue him, but in the course of these events, an attempt was made on the life of his trusted right-hand man, Smokey, who miraculously managed to survive. Smokey then snitched on Torres to the cops, resulting in his second arrest, and ultimately, his death. During his trial, Torres acted as his own lawyer, despite holding only a 5th grade education. Looking at it from a plain point of view, it looked pretty stupid, but in reality, Torres was playing a brilliant game. He did this to prolong his stay in Men's Central Jail, where he was collecting a tax on all drug sales. He was selling contraband to other cartel members in prison and received a 1/3 tax imposed on all the drug sales made outside. This was pissing a lot of inmates off, and it meant Torres had to go. 9 a.m. on this said day, Ray and Juan Martinez gained entry into Torres' cell and brutally stabbed him multiple times to death. That man died at 59 years old. Number 8. Gilberto Rodriguez Orella. Just like our lovely previous convict, Gilberto was among the leaders of the Cali Cartel. But unlike Elmer, Gilberto met the hands of death in a different fashion. January 30th, 1939, Gilberto was born in Tolima, Colombia. He lived a pretty normal life growing up, but in 1975 he joined forces with his brother, Miguel Rodriguez Orihuela, and Jose Santa Cruz Lodoño to start the Cali Cartel. They exploited the cocaine market in its early stages, supplying more than 80% of the cocaine found in the US and 90% of the same product across Europe. And you're probably thinking to yourself, wasn't Pablo Escobar supplying an equivalent amount? Well, Escobar was. But before the Medellin cartel found its feet in the market, the Cali cartel was running the show, raking in more money than you can dream about. But the one mistake that Gilberto probably made was trying to expand his organization deeper into Europe. November 15, 1984, Gilberto and his associates traveled to Galicia, Spain, with the aim of expanding the cartel on the European continent. Here they would meet with traffickers, as well as to make an alliance with the powerful and respected Camorra Mafia group to help push that product. It was a solid move, since Escobar had taken over the US market at this time. The only downside was, this move officially plastered his name on the DEA's most wanted list, and also made him wanted in Colombia. June 9, 1995, Gilberto was arrested by the Colombian National Police during a house raid in Cali. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but by a miracle, or corruption, whichever one did the job here, Gilberto was freed just 7 years later in November 2002. On the flip side, the US government wasn't willing to let this man go just like that. His extradition warrant was granted, and he was brought down to the US to face charges related to drug trafficking. September 26, 2006, Gilberto was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He tried appealing for an early release, given that the living conditions in prison were killing him slowly. He suffered from multiple infections and diseases as deadly as cancer. However, Gilberto's crimes were so repugnant, there was no way he was getting out. May 31st, 2022, Gilberto died at a prison medical center at the age of 83. Number 7. Elino Anrox. May 14, 2020, Mexican drug lord Jose Rodrigo Aretiga Gamboa, aka Elino Anrox, was brutally killed by his Sinaloa cartel hit squad while on house arrest. Before I get into the details of his death, let's rewind a bit to know why exactly Elino was murdered. 1946, Elino Anrox was at home, sitting with his wife and young daughter. Desperation for financial security pushed him to seek assistance from none other than his notorious neighbors, the Zambada family. However, Anrox wouldn't immediately plunge into the treacherous depths of cartel work. First, he was entrusted with the intricacies of logistics. Then he embarked on the path of making smaller drug deliveries, before he eventually devised a grand strategy for transporting tons of illicit cargo from Mexico to the U.S., all while staying incognito. With numerous trades going back and forth, evading the watchful eyes of U.S. border patrols, Anrox reaped a bounty of millions. His initial motive was to secure his family's welfare, but as wealth and power intoxicated him, his ambitions swelled. He then formed Los Anrox, an armed squadron of the Sinaloa Cartel, providing armed security services to El Mayo Zambada. From that point on, Los Anrox brutally killed and dehumanized their rivals in ways only monsters would. And if that wasn't bad enough, he went on a social media parade, hoping to achieve some level of fame. But it all came crashing in December 2013, after being arrested at an airport in the Netherlands. He was identified with his infamous Los Anrox diamond ring that all members wore. January 2014. He was extradited to the U.S. to face charges related to drug trafficking. After a year of court hearings, Anrox pleaded guilty in March 2015, receiving a surprisingly short sentence of 7 years and 3 months, raising suspicion of his cooperation with authorities. After 5 years of serving time, he was released under house arrest in March 2020. It became clear that El Chino had cut a deal with the feds, and the Sinaloa Cartel knew he couldn't be trusted anymore. On the night of May 14, 2020, El Chino Anrox was at his sister's place, having dinner alongside her husband. But out of nowhere, a Sinaloa Cartel hit squad stormed in, resulting in a fierce firefight with Chino firing back with an assault rifle. This gunfire lasted until dawn, but when El Chino Anrox and his sister ran out of ammo, they surrendered and were gunned down in their home. The next day, police in the town of Ayune, Sinaloa, discovered a black SUV with 3 dead bodies inside. These were the bodies of El Chino, his sister, and her husband. Number 6. The Iceman. On a cold night in the year 2015, Mark the Iceman Fellows murdered one of the biggest gangsters in Manchester, right in front of his driveway. The crime solidified the Iceman as one of the coldest hitmen in the area. But he wasn't just any hitman. He was allegedly used by drug traffickers and gangsters in the area to carry out some high-profile killings, earning him a spot on our list. He was born on September 5, 1980, in Salford, Manchester. However, as a teenager, he would move to Warrington, where he lived most of his life. By 2015, Mark had become a hardened criminal and a hitman for anyone who cared to hire him. It was also in 2015 that he killed a man named Paul Massey. Massey, known as Mr. Big, was well known throughout Greater Manchester for criminal activities, particularly the sale of drugs during the 1990s rave scene. He was jailed for 14 years in '99 for a stabbing outside a nightclub in Manchester. Even after he got out, Mr. Big was still a big threat. However, on a cold night in Clifton, Salford, Mark Fellows dressed up in army fatigues and blasted Massey's body with bullets right in front of his driveway. 3 years later, Mark murdered Massey's friend and gang associate, Kinsella, a 53-year-old enforcer from Liverpool, while walking his dogs with his pregnant partner, Wendy Owen, on a secluded footpath near their home in Rainhill, Merseyside. Mark approached him on his bike, silently taking a shot at Kinsella from behind. He didn't stop there. He also tried to eliminate his wife, but she miraculously survived. Mark the Iceman Fellows was eventually linked to both murders and was arrested by authorities. He'd be given first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. But here's the crazy part. Barely 1 month after his sentencing, Mark Fellows was attacked in prison with a razor. He tried seeking help from both the court and the chief prison warden, but no one came to his aid. A few weeks later, he was stabbed in the neck many times while in his cell. A few minutes later, prison wardens found him in a pool of his own blood. The scary thing now is, no one knows for sure if he's dead or not. After he was taken to the hospital, no records stated if he survived the attack or if he died. So, is the Iceman still alive? We can't say. Number 5. Rodney J Delong Jr., and Robert John Stockton. Now, it's one thing for a cartel member to be killed in prison, but it's another if a cartel or gang member does the killing. Take, for instance, the case of Rodney J Delong Jr. May 2018. In a bid to maintain the inmate-to-cell ratio, prison officials at High Desert State Prison, Nevada, decided to place an inmate named Rodney DeLong in a cell with Robert John Stockton, an Aryan Brotherhood associate who had stabbed someone to death for the notorious prison gang just 2 years earlier. So Rodney was put into this man's cell, and less than an hour later, he was found lying on the ground in a pool of his own blood. What happened? First off, DeLong was an inmate serving a 9-year sentence on a 2014 conviction for burglary, possession of a controlled substance, and assault with a deadly weapon. On the other hand, Stockton here used a shank crafted from a metal cell door to stab DeLong in the neck and eyes. And after he did that, Stockton returned the weapon along with his food tray to the correctional officers. The worst, and I do mean the worst part of this attack, was that DeLong had barely 7 months left to complete his 9-year sentence. So what exactly did he even do wrong? Well, you see, DeLong had been flagged in the prison records as an enemy of the Aryan Brotherhood, meaning that Stockton or any other member or associate of the gang would be expected to attack DeLong on sight or face retribution themselves. Number 4. Joseph Hutchinson. August 4th, 2023. LA County Sheriff's deputies were conducting a security check at the downtown LA prison when they found 51-year-old Joseph suffering from stab wounds in a cell that he shared with another inmate. So what's his story? Well, for starters, the circumstances of Hutchinson's death remain unclear, but it came just 1 month after that of Michael Torres, whom we've already talked about in this video. And just like Torres, Hutchinson was a longtime member of the Sanford gang. On the streets selling drugs for Torres, he was known as Capone. He collected Torres' money and made sure that his orders were followed behind bars and on the streets of the San Fernando Valley. However, one thing led to another, and Hutchinson was convicted for his crimes. But when he got into prison, he didn't stop. He met a guy from the Rosemead Lomas gang named Martinez. This dude took over running the jail after Torres was murdered. And since Hutchinson was one of the few people Torres trusted to run his business for him while he was still alive, Martinez took him in as his number 2. But that was probably one of the main reasons Hutchinson was killed. You see, members of Torres' clique felt Hutchinson stabbed him in the back for working with their rivals, and this earned him a one-way ticket straight to the afterlife. No one knows exactly how he was killed, but on August 3, 2023, some prisoners claim his cell was invaded by members of the Sanford gang, who wasted no second in stabbing him to death. At dawn the next day, he was found in a pool of his own blood. He was confirmed dead a few hours later. Number 3. Joe Pegle Morgan. October 27, 1993, Joe Morgan received a fateful diagnosis of inoperable liver cancer while serving life at California State Prison, Corcoran, adding a mysterious twist to his already complex life behind bars. Now, back in the 90s, Joe was an American gangster, becoming the first non-Hispanic member of the Mexican Mafia. He grew up in a really poor family, and was heavily influenced by the type of neighborhood he grew up in. As a teenager, he would join the Ford Maravilla Street Gang, one of the oldest documented gangs in LA, and from there he would go with the Mexican Mafia. He began carving his own path to destruction when he killed his girlfriend's father in 1946, leading to his arrest in the same year. However, he broke out of jail while awaiting trial by using the ID of another inmate, but he was recaptured and kept at the San Quentin State Prison. Joe was just 17 years old at the time and was ruthless when it came to breaking the law. In 1955, he was granted parole, but again, he was arrested for armed robbery, where he stole over $185,000 from a West Covina bank. In 1961, this guy had the nerve to lead 11 inmates in another jailbreak from LA County Jail through a pipe shaft, and using hacksaw blades he hid in his prosthetic leg. Now you know where he got peg leg from. Once he was out, Morgan established connections with high-ranking cartel members and mafia alike, strengthening his establishment to supply cocaine and heroin throughout California. By the mid to late 1970s, Morgan was one of the highest-ranking Mexican mafia members in Southern California and had connections in most of the U.S. and now Mexico. But he would be eventually arrested and handed life for a series of armed robberies he committed in the 1970s. On said day, Morgan was diagnosed with that liver cancer. His wife requested that he be released on compassionate grounds. But before the court could grant her appeal, Morgan passed away. Number 2. John Gotti. Now we know John's not a cartel member, but the story of his life till death as an American gangster and mafia boss is befitting for this video. Born on October 27, 1940, John Joseph Gotti Jr. was raised in the Bronx borough of New York City. He was raised in a working-class Italian-American family in South Bronx, but at the same time, his childhood was marked by a turbulent environment influenced by the criminal underworld. He would drop out of school at a young age and become involved in petty criminal activities. As he grew older, he became increasingly entangled into that world of organized crime, eventually rising the ranks to become one of the most infamous leaders of the Gambino crime family. Gotti and his brothers were riding the waves of crime, making as much money as they could fit in their pockets. However, the FBI indicted some of Gotti's crew members for selling drugs. He began to worry that he and his brother might face deadly consequences from the boss, Castellano, due to their drug dealings. That fear continued to grow, especially amid increasing discord within the crime family. In response, Gotti took power into his own hands. He orchestrated Castellano's murder. He would savagely kill Castellano and gain power. At the peak of his reign, Gotti stood as one of the most influential and menacing crime bosses in the U.S. And during that reign, he gained notoriety for outspoken nature and flashy demeanor, earning him favor with a good faction of the public. While his fellow mobsters usually stayed away from media attention, Gotti, known as the Dapper Don, flaunted expensive attire and charm in front of news cameras. It kinda left people loving and hating him at the same time. Tragically for Gotti, his own underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, cooperated with the FBI to convict him in 1991. Gravano agreed to become a witness for the prosecution and testify against Gotti, after hearing incriminating wiretaps in which Gotti belittled him, while both were implicated in several murders. In 1992, Gotti was found guilty of 5 murders, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, illegal gambling, extortion, and loan sharking. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and was moved out to the United States Penitentiary in Marion. Then on June 10, 2002, Gotti would die of throat cancer while in custody at the U.S. Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. And number 1. El Netto. Oh boy, where do I even begin with this one? Well, Ernesto Alfredo Peñón de la Cruz, also known as El Netto, was a Mexican cartel member known for his leadership over Los Metzicles, a street gang based in Ciudad Juarez and allies of El Chapo. April 6, 1989 marked the birth of El Netto in Chihuahua, Mexico. A little before adulthood, he had already committed a few crimes that, to his advantage, went unnoticed by law enforcement. It wouldn't be until 2007 that Mexican authorities identified him as a violent criminal leader. Now, me saying El Netto killed people for fun wouldn't be out of place, because in reality, he kinda did. And then he would ship off their heads in coolers to whoever cared to have them. The group he controlled, Los Metzicles, was responsible for numerous kidnappings, extortions, brutal murders, and every inhumane vice you can think of. By 2009, his fame got the best of him. He was identified, arrested, and jailed in connection with 30 kidnappings that occurred in his resident state, and subsequently he was handed a 224-year sentence in December 2010. But this is far from the end of his story. On Sunday, January 1st, 2023, El Netto escaped from Cerezo No. 3 State Prison in Ciudad Juarez, along with 24 fellow inmates. The jailbreak involved a mass shooting, leaving 17 people dead, including 10 guards. However, this was just a means to an end. 4 days later, El Netto was taken down by a team involving the Mexican Army and state police, in the Colonia Azteca neighborhood. He exchanged gunfire with the Mexican army before trying to escape in his Beamer. But that luck ran out, and he was killed there on the street. Obviously, he wasn't killed in prison, but from the gory photos that went wild after his death, maybe dying in prison wouldn't have been so bad after all.